My daughter stopped talking to me after the divorce, refused to listen, but after 8 years, she wanted my money. I'm 54 years old, and I got divorced 8 years ago. My ex-wife, who is now 48, did everything she could to ruin my reputation, but what hurt me the most was that my daughter, now 28, completely cut me out of her life and took her mother's side without even asking for my version of events. It took me a long time to come to terms with that, and honestly, I'm not sure I ever fully did. At the time of our divorce, my daughter was already an adult, so I couldn't be part of her life unless she wanted me to be. And she clearly didn't. She made her choice, and that choice wasn't me. I had no other family except for my mother, who was suffering from Alzheimer's, which made that period of my life even worse. I tried reaching out to my daughter several times, but she was firm in her decision. At some point, my ex-wife even threatened to take me to court for harassment if I didn't stop trying. That was the moment I realized it was over. I stopped reaching out. For the past 8 years, I dedicated my life to my career and taking care of my sick mother. I had a few short-lived relationships, but after my marriage fell apart, I found it hard to truly trust anyone. That was my life for almost a decade. Then, out of nowhere, my daughter reached out. I was overwhelmed with joy. I thought she had finally come to her senses and realized that the divorce wasn't solely my fault. This meant even more to me because my mother had recently passed away, and I had been grieving alone. I had no family left. And now, suddenly, my daughter wanted to talk. She called me from an unfamiliar number, and when I picked up, I didn't even recognize her voice at first. It had been so long. When she told me who she was, I was stunned. She said she saw on Facebook that her grandmother had passed and wanted to check on me. That caught me off guard. I hadn't even known she followed my social media. I thought it was a kind gesture, though. I thanked her, told her I was managing, and admitted that I missed her. We talked for a little while, and then she said she wanted to meet in person. Of course, I agreed immediately. We planned to have dinner at my place that weekend. I was both nervous and excited. It had been so long, I wanted to make something special, so I cooked for her. When she arrived, I barely recognized her. Nearly a decade had passed. At first, the conversation was a little awkward, but we gradually eased into it. She told me about her life and her job, and I shared what had been happening with me. Then, finally, we addressed the elephant in the room. I asked her why she never once tried to hear my side of the story, why she immediately sided with her mother. I admitted that yes, her mother had always been the more involved parent. She was a stay-at-home mom while I worked long hours in construction. But I had always tried to spend every free moment I had with her. She sighed and said she regretted how things had played out. She had been too young to really understand everything and had simply believed whatever her mother told her. My ex had painted me as the villain, as a selfish man who cared about no one but himself. And because my daughter never heard my side, she had no reason to question that narrative. We talked about it for a while. It was going well, until she revealed the real reason she had come. We had been talking for hours when I finally asked why she decided to contact me after all these years. She looked uncomfortable for a moment, then said she wanted to be honest with me. That's when she admitted the truth. She had been keeping tabs on me through Facebook and had assumed that after my mother passed, lawyers would contact her about an inheritance. When that didn't happen, she decided to reach out to me directly. She told me she had recently gotten engaged and needed money for the wedding. That hit me like a punch to the gut. All this time, I had thought my prayers had finally been answered, that I was getting my daughter back, that I had a second chance at a family. But none of that was true. She never cared. She didn't miss me. She just wanted money. And the funniest part? It wasn't even her inheritance. By law, everything belonged to me. If she hadn't abandoned me, if she had been even a half-decent daughter, she probably would have received a significant portion, if not all of it. I don't care about the money. I have my own house, I don't have expensive hobbies, and I buy most of my clothes at Target. Even if an inheritance had been involved, I wouldn't have minded helping her with her wedding. But not like this. Not when she only came to me because she thought she could cash in. All these thoughts raced through my mind, but somehow, I kept my composure. I took a deep breath and asked, "Is that all you wanted?" She immediately went on the defensive, insisting that the inheritance was a secondary issue and that her real goal was to reconnect with me. She claimed she had wanted to reach out for a long time but couldn't find the courage. She thought I would never forgive her for abandoning me without explanation. And on top of that, her mother had manipulated her into staying away. I wasn't sure what to believe. Part of me wanted to think she wasn't just here for the money, but I couldn't ignore the timing. I asked her how she even knew about the inheritance, and she explained that years before the divorce, when she was visiting my late mother, my mom had told her that everything left from my father, who had passed away long ago, would go to her as the only grandchild. At the time, my marriage was fine, and my mother likely had no reason to think that would ever change. I could understand why she might have told my daughter that. And honestly, if the divorce had never happened, or if my daughter hadn't abandoned me for so many years, she probably would have received most, if not all, of the inheritance. But the thought that she only cared about the money, not about rebuilding our relationship, crushed me. She had given me false hope, and that was more painful than anything. At that moment, I decided to test her. I told her that there was no inheritance left. I asked how much she was expecting, and her estimate was so accurate that it was obvious she had thought about this a lot. She had planned this. So I told her that unfortunately, I had to disappoint her. Her grandmother had left everything to me years ago, and I intended to use it to start a business. I said I couldn't help her with the inheritance, but I could offer her a few $1,000s from my own savings to help with wedding expenses. The look of disappointment on her face confirmed my worst fears. She tried to mask it, saying she appreciated the offer, but as the only grandchild, she deserved at least some of the inheritance. It was her grandmother's money, and she had been promised it. I told her that I wanted to help her, but my decision was final. If she didn't want the money I was offering, I had nothing else to give. Her face turned red with frustration. She demanded that I reconsider, but I stood my ground. I told her I was doing what I felt was right. That's when she finally dropped the act. She sneered and told me I had always been and would always be the same selfish bastard her mother always said I was. That she was glad I was alone. I looked at her with barely concealed disgust. Her words hurt, but by that point, I knew what to expect. I just hadn't expected her to show her true colors so quickly. That was it. She kept talking, but I cut her off. I told her that I should have known she was her mother's daughter. After all, the only reason she ever reached out to someone was to ask for a favor. I also told her that using my grief over my mother's death to manipulate me was disgusting, even for someone like her. She opened her mouth to respond, but I just laughed in her face. I told her that if she hadn't blocked my number all these years, she would have received my messages from her grandmother, and maybe, just maybe, she would have ended up with most of the inheritance. That got her attention. She looked shocked and asked what I meant. I told her to unblock my number, the one she had used as a child, so I could forward her every single message I had sent over the years. Messages she had never seen. She did it, and I sent them all. Messages where I begged her to hear my side of the story. Messages where I told her about her grandmother's diagnosis, how I wanted them to meet before it was too late. Messages full of pain, regret, and loneliness. Because the truth was, in the early days of her illness, my mother often asked for her granddaughter. She wanted to see her one last time before the disease took her memories away. And I had to watch her heart break every time I told her that wasn't going to happen. I still remember how much that hurt me. And now this ungrateful, selfish child had the audacity to demand her inheritance? To be fair, my daughter did look shaken after reading everything. She apologized, saying that based on those messages, it was obvious her grandmother had wanted her to have part of the inheritance. And then she had the nerve to tell me it wasn't fair to punish her this way. She added that she had been young and naive during the divorce, and that if she had understood things better, everything would have turned out differently. She also insisted that she truly wanted to rebuild our relationship, but if I chose to be selfish now, she wouldn't feel comfortable continuing our contact. I told her that if money was the foundation of our relationship, then maybe we shouldn't be trying to fix it at all. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But at that moment, I just couldn't. I told her that I was open to considering a second chance for us, but she wasn't getting a dime from the inheritance. She looked at me with pure hatred. Then, she left. I didn't try to stop her. Since then, I've talked to a few friends. Most of them agree that I did the right thing, but one of my closest friends argued that since I don't even care about the money, I should just let it go and give her a portion if it meant having a family again. I disagree. But ever since he said that, I can't get the thought out of my head. Should I give her a part of the inheritance? Now, let's pause for a moment, drop your thoughts in the comments. And now, let's move on to the update. Update 1. What really happened during the divorce? I think I'll start by answering the most common question, what actually happened during my divorce? I haven't talked about it in years, but I figure there's nothing to lose now. My ex-wife and I were married for 23 years. You'd think that after so much time together, she wouldn't stab me in the back. But she did. I won't go into graphic details, but I found out she had been cheating on me, and not just on sesh, had been sleeping with multiple men for years before I finally discovered the truth. When it all came to light, I was devastated. I had no idea how to handle it, so I started drinking. A lot. And, in my anger and pain, I cheated back out of revenge. It ruined me. We fought constantly. And I think between the constant fighting and my drinking, my ex had no trouble convincing our daughter that I was the villain. We lived separately for nearly a year in that mess before finally deciding on divorce. My ex-wife was a journalist, sort of a local celebrity. She used her influence and connections to try and destroy my reputation. And honestly, she almost succeeded. After the divorce, it took me a long time to quit drinking and rebuild my life. And, as I've mentioned before, the fact that my daughter completely abandoned me didn't help. I'll admit, when I first learned about my wife's affairs, I completely lost it. I wasn't much of a father during that time. Even after we separated, and for about a year after the divorce, I isolated myself and barely spoke to my daughter. But once I got sober and put my life back together, the very first thing I did was try to reach out and apologize. She refused to listen. She had already made up her mind, and she blocked me everywhere. I thought that if I gave her time, she'd come around, but 8 years passed, and our relationship only got worse. Update 2. The inheritance. Another big question was about my mother's inheritance. Technically, that money belonged to my father. My grandparents were doctors, and over their careers, bought multiple properties around the city. Most of them were rented out, providing a steady income. When my father died, I was 21. At the time, he left everything to my mother. During my marriage, and even years after my divorce, all of that property was still under her name. That is, until her health began to decline. After her passing, I inherited everything. I was her only heir. My ex-wife got nothing from the divorce aside from alimony, which she received until she remarried a few years ago. By then, all assets were still in my mother's name. So, here's the situation: me daughter was never entitled to anything. Sure, she knew her grandmother owned rental properties and that some were listed on Airbnb, but I never touched that money. My construction business made more than enough for me to live comfortably. I hope this answers everyone's questions. As for my daughter, she hasn't reached out since that night, and I doubt she ever will. To be honest, I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt at all. But at this point, I've learned not to expect too much from people, no matter who they are. So, that's that. Thanks to everyone who sent messages of support. I really do appreciate it. I also started thinking that maybe it was time to try rebuilding my personal life, meeting someone new, finding a partner, instead of waiting for ghosts from my past to return. Update 2. An unexpected visitor. This past week has been eventful, to say the least. I thought my last update would be the final one, but apparently, life had other plans for me. I had just gotten home from work and was planning to meet up with some friends when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, there she was, my ex-wife, and my worst nightmare. She had changed her hairstyle, lost some weight enough that it took me a few seconds to recognize her. But let's be honest, after spending decades with someone, forgetting their face is impossible. Seeing her again was a shock, to say the least. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there in awkward silence. She asked if I had a moment to talk. I hesitated, but I didn't want her just standing there on my doorstep, so I let her in. It was incredibly uncomfortable, as you can probably imagine. We made some small talk before she finally got to the point. She admitted that she knew how strange this was, but there was something she needed to tell me. I told her to go ahead. She said that our daughter had come to her about the inheritance. Honestly, I expected this. What other reason would she have to talk to me after all these years? She said she understood that the divorce had been hard on me, and that, in hindsight, maybe she had gone too far back then. I just chuckled at that. She ignored my reaction and continued. Then, she told me that I shouldn't punish our daughter for what happened between us. She repeated what my daughter had said before, that she was young at the time, that I shouldn't hold it against her for siding with her mother. At that point, I cut her off. I told her that I no longer held grudges against anyone, and even if I did, it wouldn't be against our daughter. What hurt me was knowing that after all these years, the only thing that brought her back to me was the possibility of money. I repeated what I had told my daughter. If she had cared enough to rebuild our relationship earlier, she would have gotten the inheritance. My ex tried to defend her, but I shut her down. I told her my decision was final. If they were going to keep circling the same topic over and over, then this conversation was a waste of time. I had things to do. If she had nothing else to say, she should leave. She nodded, apologized for disturbing me, and walked out. I told her there was no need to apologize. And then she was gone. After she left, I just sat there in disbelief. I never thought I'd see her again, let alone have her standing in my house, talking to me. It was strange. And it stirred up a lot of old memories I would have preferred to leave buried. I met up with my friends, tried to put it out of my mind. So, yeah, that happened, and I just needed to get it off my chest. Update 3. Another call from my daughter. Earlier today, I was at work when my daughter called me. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. Right away, I told her that if this was another conversation about the inheritance, there was no point in talking. She insisted it wasn't. She said she had been thinking a lot about what happened and felt like she owed me an apology. She admitted that she should have handled things differently. Then, she said that if I was willing to forgive her and give our relationship another chance, she would love for me to attend her wedding. I was stunned. I asked her if she was sure. She said yes. She also told me to take my time to think about it and let her know if I wanted to come. I agreed, and we ended the call. Now, I'm completely torn. On one hand, the thought of being at her wedding makes me happy, but I can't shake the feeling that this is just another way to win me over and eventually get the inheritance. On the other hand, if she's being genuine, I don't want to waste a chance to rebuild our relationship. If I refuse and she never reaches out again, I wouldn't be able to blame her for it. I'd appreciate any advice. If anyone has an opinion, I'd love to hear it. Update 4. I'm going to the wedding. A lot of you said that attending the wedding wouldn't hurt anything, and I think that makes sense. It's just an invitation. I'm not obligated to do anything in return. And no, I won't be part of the ceremony. I'm simply attending as a guest. That's fine with me. I understand that going from being completely estranged for 8 years to walking her down the aisle would be too much too fast. For both of us, I really hope this is the beginning of something new, that we can build something real between us again. Thank you for your attention. Subscribe, leave a like, and have a great day.